When I returned home from college, exhausted, my mother told me that there were two marriage proposals for me from the same family. I was surprised and asked how there could be two proposals from one household. She explained that my potential mother-in-law had said, "Whichever of my sons Ozma likes, I will ask for her hand in marriage for him." My mother added, "Dear, there are two photos placed on the side drawer by your bed. Whichever one you choose will arrange your marriage with him." Saying this, my mother gathered up the dishes and left. I was too tired from college to think about it and simply went to sleep. When I woke up, the two photographs immediately caught my attention. I quickly picked them up and, holding my phone, sat down on the sofa. One brother was 45 years old and the other was 30. I was working as a lecturer at a private college at the time, a job I disliked and wanted to leave as soon as possible. My mother-in-law-to-be had proposed this match because of my job. She wanted an educated daughter-in-law for her well-educated son, hoping they would have a good understanding. I looked at the two pictures closely. Since I was around 30 years old, I felt that her younger son would be a better option for me. He also worked as a lecturer at a university. I took photos of the two pictures and sent them to my friends, hoping they could help me decide. All of them advised me not to marry someone 15 years older than me. They said I might face difficulties later on and suggested that I agree to marry my mother-in-law's younger son. Although her elder son appeared very polite and handsome, his age difference of 15 years made me lean toward the younger one. I thought the younger son looked charming and well-mannered, so I agreed to his proposal and informed my mother of my decision. My mother tried to convince me to choose the elder son, saying he would be a better match, but I couldn't imagine how I would face my friends if I married someone uneducated. How would I explain that my husband had no degree while I had completed an MPhil? If his mindset turned out to be like that of people from rural areas, what would I do? My elder brother-in-law wasn't educated. He managed the family lands. My husband, however, had an MPhil and planned to pursue a PhD. This thought reassured me, and I chose Hasib's proposal. I was around 5'4" in height, and my husband was about the same height, while my elder brother-in-law was 6 feet tall. Outwardly, my brother-in-law seemed like the perfect choice, but he only had a matriculation certificate and no further education. My husband, on the other hand, was physically slim but well-educated, holding an MPhil and aiming to continue his studies. I thought about what I would tell my friends. How could I explain marrying someone uneducated? With that in mind, I agreed to Hasib's proposal, even though I wasn't entirely convinced in my heart. My family left the decision up to me, and I was still unsure about what I truly wanted. I felt confused, but in the end, I decided to follow my friend's advice and express my willingness to marry Hasib. The marriage arrangements moved quickly, and before I knew it, I was a bride arriving at my in-laws' home. Once there, the biggest shock came when I saw my brother-in-law. I was struck by a deep sense of regret, wondering why I'd agreed to marry my husband when my brother-in-law was more handsome and carried himself with greater dignity. Not only was he impressive in appearance, but everyone praised his behavior, calling him honest, noble, empathetic, and a truly good person. In contrast, my husband's temper was well known throughout the family, and he looked down on everyone else as he was the only educated person in the household. Though he treated me well, I always carried a sense of regret. From the start, the choice had been mine, to decide which proposal I would accept, and that choice ruined my life. Eventually, my husband divorced me. I've come to believe that the saying, "men don't trap women, but women trap men," defines my life. I was so taken by my brother-in-law that I wished to have him in my life somehow, even if I remained married to my husband, Hasib. I made every effort to get closer to my brother-in-law, and to a great extent, I succeeded. He often felt lonely, and since it was just the two of us in the house most of the day, while my husband worked in the city, we spent a lot of time together. My mother-in-law was a disabled woman who needed constant care, someone to help her with daily tasks and exercise. There were many servants in the house, so I had little to do. I began to join my brother-in-law for evening tea in the garden. My mother-in-law rarely came outside due to the stairs, which were too difficult for her to navigate. One time, my husband left for an entire month on a business trip, leaving me alone at home. My mother-in-law was visiting her daughter, so it was just me and my brother-in-law in the house. One evening, as we sat in the garden drinking tea, I asked him why he had never married. I also asked what kind of girl he'd want if he did get married. Laughing, he replied, I haven't married yet because I haven't met anyone like you. I looked at him and it struck me how handsome and charismatic he was. His muscular frame could captivate anyone. By comparison, my husband wasn't as attractive. He didn't go to the gym, had a slight paunch, and lacked the impressive physical presence that my brother-in-law had. When I agreed to marry my husband, it was because of his education, status, and job. But I was drawn to my brother-in-law from the very beginning. It had been a foolish decision, made in haste, that changed my life for the worse and left me feeling ashamed of my choices. From the day I arrived in this house and laid eyes on my brother-in-law, I couldn't shake the regret of choosing my husband over him. This regret began to affect my relationship with my husband. Our bond weakened and distance grew between us. Meanwhile, I kept getting closer to my brother-in-law, though there was no official relationship between us. We usually had casual conversations, nothing inappropriate at first. A few times, my mother-in-law warned me not to spend so much time with my brother-in-law, saying the housemaids were gossiping and spreading strange rumors about us in the village. I ignored her advice and mentioned it to my brother-in-law. He became defensive on my behalf, saying, "She is my sister-in-law, and I respect her deeply. I don't think of her in that way, and I want everyone else to stop thinking like that." The fact that he stood up for me only made me admire him more, pulling me closer to him emotionally. My husband, however, remained silent and didn't say a word in my defense. After this incident, the distance between my husband and me only grew larger. We eventually began sleeping in separate rooms. My brother-in-law realized that I liked him, and to this day, I regret that he knew. One day while I was sleeping, my mother-in-law came to my room and began admonishing me, saying that I was the cause of discord between her two sons. She accused me not only of ruining my relationship with my husband, but also of destroying the bond with my brother-in-law. She told me I should be ashamed, as a daughter-in-law, for being too familiar with my brother-in-law. She also criticized me for not considering what the household staff might think. She made it clear that she was warning me for the last time and that I should never again be seen so close to my brother-in-law. Although she was disabled and unable to keep a constant eye on us, she had seen us together numerous times. She said it was inappropriate for me to have the kind of conversations with my brother-in-law that I should have been having with my husband. She reminded me that when the proposal was first made, she had informed my mother that it would be up to us to decide which of her sons I should marry, warning that any wrong decision could lead to strife in their home. It was my decision to marry her younger son, and now I was growing closer to her elder son, which was against all moral values. She warned me to mend my ways or face the consequences. She even threatened to tell her younger son to divorce me. She said, "If I had the power to bring you into this house, I also have the power to remove you from it. This is your first and last warning. If I see you near my elder son again, there will be no one worse than me. Consider this your final warning. Next time I will act on it. You won't even be able to show your face to your parents when I tell them what you've been up to. Developing a relationship with your brother-in-law while married to my younger son." I was half asleep, so I didn't respond. She came, gave me her warning, and left with a maid. She was in her wheelchair. Her words infuriated me. I thought to myself, who does this old woman think she is, trying to tell me what to do and what not to do? Can't she see the flaws in her own son, who leaves me alone here while he's off in the city? Do my desires not matter? Do I not have any emotions? That evening, she left to visit her daughter's house and instructed a maid to keep an eye on me. I knew she had done this, so I behaved very normally and avoided talking to my brother-in-law. I stayed in my room all day. As night fell, the maid went back to her home, and because of heavy rain, my mother-in-law could not return. This gave me and my brother-in-law the opportunity to spend the night together. There was no one left to stop us or scold us. We were so attached to each other that we no longer wanted to be apart. We wanted to be together as one. After midnight, when all the servants were asleep, my brother-in-law came to my room. He was carrying 2 cups of tea. We sat in my room chatting casually. Then he mentioned feeling cold, and I suggested he share my blanket. Our conversations were usually quite ordinary, but people had given them a different meaning. It was true that I had started to like my brother-in-law, but I had never looked at him with the intention of developing a physical relationship. However, everyone twisted the situation into something it wasn't. Because of these rumors, we began thinking of acting on the accusations. After all, we were being defamed throughout the village. My husband eventually found out about the rumors as well. After this, my husband started keeping his distance. He wouldn't return home for months, and even when he did, he wouldn't speak to me. Instead, he spent his days out with friends and quickly went to bed at night. Several times, he warned me to stop this behavior and take our relationship seriously. But whenever I tried to let go of everything and approach him, he pushed me away. This wounded my pride. How could my husband stay out at night when I was at home? My brother-in-law told me that my husband liked someone else and was planning to marry her soon. That thought made me resolve to build a relationship with my brother-in-law. I wanted to show my husband that I wasn't going to waste away or stop living just because he left. I wanted to show him that I could lead a fulfilling life without him. I hoped that he would regret leaving me for another woman, realizing what a good wife he had left behind. This all happened a year after our marriage. My mother-in-law fell severely ill and passed away after a month of illness. After her death, my brother-in-law and I had the freedom to interact as we pleased. My husband had already moved to the city, married his second wife, and was living a happy life. Meanwhile, I wanted to create my own happiness. After my mother-in-law passed away, my brother-in-law and I spent hours talking. Our conversations always stayed within the boundaries of decency, but people began to interpret them differently. Hearing what others were saying, we started to see each other differently too, but we still didn't speak to each other inappropriately. Rather, we developed a quiet fondness for each other through our glances. There was no physical relationship between us. However, one night, when my brother-in-law wasn't feeling well and the household staff weren't present, it began to rain heavily and the power went out. My brother-in-law called me to his room. He asked me to bring him tea and some fever medicine. When I arrived with the tea and medicine, he was lying on the bed, groaning in pain. I handed him the medicine, helped him drink the tea, and was about to leave when he asked me to massage his head, saying it was hurting badly. I sat down and started massaging his head. I don't know what delicate moment it was, but something changed. We couldn't keep our distance any longer, and we crossed a boundary. What happened made it impossible for us to look each other in the eye afterward. I quickly got up and rushed back to my room, replaying my mother-in-law's warnings in my mind. She had been right. She was older and wiser, and we were young and reckless. We had made a mistake that would haunt us for the rest of our lives. A mistake that made us unable to bear seeing each other's faces anymore. Sitting on my bed, I was filled with regret. Why had I taken that step? Why had I let the distance grow between my husband and me? Why had I gotten close to my brother-in-law, all for something as fleeting as a physical connection that would one day turn to dust? My conscience was relentlessly accusing me. In my state of despair, I called my brother and told him to come and take me back to my parents' home. I couldn't stay here any longer. By then, the whole family already knew that my husband had remarried and was living with his second wife in the city. I was left alone in their village home with my brother-in-law. Since then, everyone around us talked so much and spread so many rumors that living together under the same roof became unbearable. Those rumors turned out to be true, and we made that one mistake, one we never would have committed if we had been in our right minds. It was true that we liked each other, but we never wanted to cross such a line, to degrade ourselves in each other's eyes. I sat on my bed trying to gather my thoughts when I heard a knock on the door. I opened it to find my brother-in-law standing there. He immediately knelt down at my feet, apologizing profusely, and begged me not to tell anyone what had happened. In disgust, I pushed him away and slammed the door shut, locking it from the inside. I then sat there, waiting anxiously for my brother to come and take me away. Never in my life had I expected my brother-in-law to treat me this way. Although I liked him, I had never wanted to betray my husband. I hated my husband for remarrying, for abandoning me, and I didn't want to see him again. But I also didn't want to divorce him and marry someone else. I still wished for a happy life with my husband, and that's why I resolved to reach out to him and sort out the misunderstandings that had grown between us. Not long after, there was another knock at the door. I thought it was my brother, so I unlocked it, only to find my brother-in-law standing there again. This time, he started behaving inappropriately. Horrified, I ran out of the room, down the stairs, and into the drawing room. In the dim light, I collided with someone in the hallway. Startled, I asked, "Who's there?" A voice responded, "It's me, your husband, Azmi. What's wrong? Why are you running? Your brother called and asked me to come check on you. Is everything okay?" As soon as I heard my husband's voice, I instinctively hugged him. By then, my brother-in-law had also come downstairs. Seeing my husband, he panicked and started making excuses. He said, "Your wife was the one trying to seduce me. Otherwise, you know I'm not that kind of person. I've never looked at another woman in this village. So why would I look at my own sister-in-law that way?" I looked at my husband, convinced that he would now surely divorce me and throw me out of the house. But he didn't. Instead, he grabbed his brother by the collar and started hitting him. My husband shouted, "I know everything that's been going on here. You think I'm just a child because I'm 15 years younger than you? I made the mistake of leaving my wife here under your care and went off to remarry. But God is now punishing me in the form of my own wife being unsafe in her own home, and the one threatening her is none other than my own brother. I stayed quiet, thinking you were simply keeping each other company, that you talked to each other in my absence to fill the loneliness. But you turned it into something else entirely and began exploiting her. Yes, she's a woman, flawed as God made her, but that doesn't mean you, as a sensible person, had the right to take advantage of her. You should have remembered that she's my wife, the mother of my child-to-be, and treated her with the respect she deserved." My husband was speaking all these words in one breath while lashing out at his older brother. For the first time, I felt truly protected under his shadow. Yes, I was at fault, but I had done everything in a state of ignorance. My actions were not intended as betrayal. I had been seeking comfort in my loneliness, and that comfort came in the form of my brother-in-law. I liked him, but he did not feel the same about me. He had never married because he cared for someone else. This entire ordeal happened because he was swayed by the devil's whispers. Now the two brothers were fighting fiercely, and I stood there stunned, watching them. I didn't know whose side to take or how to intervene. My head was spinning as I struggled to think of a solution. That's when I made a decision. I wouldn't let these brothers tear each other apart over me. I didn't want to be the reason they could never look each other in the eye again. My brother-in-law was the elder sibling in the family, someone we all respected equally. I couldn't let this continue. I stepped between them and, raising my voice, said, "Enough! How long are you going to fight? You're brothers, and you're fighting over a woman. I'm just a newcomer to this family. You've been together since childhood, and yet you're letting this come between you? Remember, you share the same mother's milk. Whatever has happened is in the past. Let it go. We need to move forward and live a peaceful, happy life the way Mother wanted. She always told me not to get too close to Habib, but I didn't understand her wisdom back then. Now I see she was right. I shouldn't have gotten so friendly with him. I want this fight to end here and now. Forget the past and focus on the present and future. Let's live a good life, together as a family. Our children will grow up in this home, and I don't want them to be deprived of any familial bonds. I have an idea," I continued. "My cousin Sobia, who is divorced, could marry Habib. She's lonely, and Habib wouldn't have to live alone anymore. When the mind is idle, it becomes the devil's playground. If he's married, he won't be left to his own thoughts, and we can all live happily as one family. Hasib, I promise you that I and your other wife will live like sisters. We'll never fight. Just let us live together as one family." As soon as I said this, both of them fell silent. After a long pause, Hasib finally spoke. "I only have one wife. I've already divorced Hamda." I looked at him in astonishment and fell quiet. Hasib then told me to pack our belongings, and we prepared to leave for the city. The next day, we visited Sobia's house and proposed her marriage to Habib. 2 months later, we finalized the wedding date. When we returned to the village, we shared all the details with Habib and showed him Sobia's photo. He seemed agreeable to the idea, and for the first time in what felt like ages, my husband and I could breathe a sigh of relief.